The ship landed with a soft hum on the crystal surface of Valoria Prime. Kang Tae-hyun pressed his face against the small window and felt his breath stop in his chest. The planet was beautiful beyond words. Towers of blue and purple crystal rose from the ground like frozen flames. The sky was the color of pink silk, and 3 moons hung low on the horizon. "Stop acting like a child," said Park Soo-min from behind him. She was smiling, but her voice was sharp. "We are here to work, not to stare at pretty rocks." Tae-hyun turned away from the window and straightened his diplomatic uniform. It was black with silver buttons, and it felt too tight around his neck. He was 29 years old, and this was his first mission outside Earth's solar system. He was just a translator, the lowest rank in the diplomatic team. Nobody important. Nobody special. "I know why we are here," he said quietly. "But look at this place. Have you ever seen anything like it?" Sumin walked to the window and looked outside. For a moment, her hard expression softened. "No," she admitted. "I have not." The doors of the ship opened, and the delegation stepped out onto Valorian soil. There were 12 of them in total. Ambassador Yoon led the group, a tall woman with gray hair and cold eyes. She had been doing this job for 30 years, and she treated everyone beneath her like furniture. Tae-hyun walked at the back of the group, carrying a data pad and trying not to trip on the uneven crystal ground. The air smelled strange, like flowers and metal mixed together. It was not unpleasant, but it reminded him that he was very far from home. A group of Valorians waited for them at the base of the largest tower. They were tall, much taller than humans. Their skin was dark like polished black stone, and their eyes glowed with soft golden light. They wore robes of white and silver that moved like water when they walked. Tae-hyun had studied Valorians for months before this mission. He knew their language, their customs, their history, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy. They spoke with voices that sounded like music. Everything about them seemed perfect, ancient, and powerful. The leader of the Valorian group stepped forward. He was an old male with lines on his face and eyes that had seen centuries pass. "Welcome to Valoria Prime," he said in perfect standard. "I am High Advisor Marath. The Empress awaits you in the Crystal Hall." Ambassador Yoon bowed slightly. "We are honored by your welcome. Earth hopes this summit will bring prosperity to both our peoples." It was a rehearsed speech. Tae-hyun had heard her practice it on the ship 100 times. But Marath seemed satisfied. He turned and led them toward the great tower. The inside of the tower was even more beautiful than the outside. The walls were made of transparent crystal, and light danced through them in patterns of blue and gold. The floor was smooth like glass, and their footsteps echoed in the vast space. They walked for a long time, through corridors and upstairs that seemed to float in the air. Finally, they reached the Crystal Hall. It was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Tae-hyun could barely see it. Hundreds of Valorians stood along the walls watching the human delegation with curious and suspicious eyes. At the far end of the hall, on a throne made of white crystal, sat the Empress. Tae-hyun stopped breathing. Empress Letha was the most beautiful being he had ever seen. Her skin was darker than the other Valorians, like the night sky without stars. Her eyes were not just gold, but blazing, like 2 small suns trapped in her skull. Her hair was long and silver, falling around her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. She wore a crown of crystal that caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 colors. She was terrible and magnificent. Looking at her felt like looking at the sun. It hurt, but he could not look away. "Stop staring," Sumin whispered, elbowing him in the ribs. "You look like an idiot." Tae-hyun blinked and lowered his eyes to his data pad. His heart was beating too fast. His hands were shaking. What was wrong with him? He had seen beautiful women before. He had dated, had relationships, had his heart broken like everyone else. But this was different. This felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one wrong step would send him falling forever. Ambassador Yoon stepped forward and began her formal greeting. Tae-hyun barely heard the words. He was too busy trying to control his breathing, trying to force his eyes to stay on his data pad instead of lifting to the throne. But he failed. He looked up just for a moment. Empress Litha was not looking at Ambassador Yoon. She was looking past her, scanning the delegation with those burning golden eyes. Her gaze moved over the diplomats, the advisors, the guards, and then her eyes met his. It lasted only a second, less than a second. But in that tiny moment, Tae-hyun felt something pass between them. Recognition? Curiosity? He could not name it. Her expression did not change. She simply looked at him like he was a puzzle she had not expected to find. Then her eyes moved on, and the moment was gone. The ceremony continued. Speeches were made. Gifts were exchanged. The Valorians were polite but distant, treating the humans like children who had wandered into an adult's party. Tae-hyun stood at the back of the group and did his job, translating when needed, staying invisible when not. But he could not forget that moment, that single second when the Empress of Valoria had looked at him, a nobody, a translator, a human who would live and die in the blink of a Valorian eye. That night in his small room in the guest tower, Tae-hyun lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. The crystal walls glowed softly with their own inner light. This is stupid, he told himself. She is an empress, an alien. She is hundreds of years old. She rules an empire that spans 1,000 worlds, and you are nothing. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but when sleep finally came, he dreamed of golden eyes and a throne of white crystal. He dreamed of a voice like music asking him questions he did not understand. He dreamed of falling, endlessly falling, into a darkness that was warm and welcoming. When he woke up, he knew that his life had changed forever. He just did not know how much. 3 days passed on Valoria Prime, 3 days of meetings, negotiations, and formal dinners that seemed to go on forever. Tae-hyun worked harder than he had ever worked in his life, translating documents, taking notes, and standing quietly in corners while important people talked about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. He did not see the Empress again. She appeared at the opening ceremony, but sent representatives to handle the actual negotiations. This was normal, Suman told him. Empresses did not waste their time on minor diplomatic matters. They had advisors for that. Still, Tae-hyun found himself looking for her. Every time a door opened, every time a group of Valorians entered a room, he would look up with hope in his chest. And every time he would feel a small disappointment when she was not there. You need to stop, Suman said on the third evening. They were walking through the crystal corridors, heading to the grand banquet that would celebrate the end of the first round of negotiations. I see you looking. Everyone sees you looking. I am not looking for anyone, Tae-hyun lied. You are a terrible liar. Suman stopped and grabbed his arm. Her eyes were serious. Listen to me, Tae-hyun. She is not for you. She is not for any human. The Valorians see us as insects. Short-lived, simple, unimportant. If you let yourself have feelings for her, you will only hurt yourself. Tae-hyun wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. What was he thinking? Even if the Empress somehow noticed him, even if she somehow cared, what future could they have? She would live for 1,000 years. He would be dead before she finished her morning tea. I know, he said quietly. I will be more careful. Suman studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Now come on. We will be late for the banquet. The banquet hall was magnificent. Long tables of crystal held food that glowed with soft inner light. Valorian musicians played instruments that made sounds Tae-hyun had never heard before. Beautiful and strange and slightly sad. Hundreds of guests filled the room, both Valorian and human, talking and laughing and pretending to be friends. And there, at the head of the largest table, sat Empress Letha. She was even more beautiful than Tae-hyun remembered. Tonight she wore a dress of deep purple that seemed to be made of liquid shadow. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style, held in place by pins of glowing crystal. Her golden eyes moved across the room, watching everything, missing nothing. Tae-hyun forced himself to look away. He found his seat at the back of the human section, far from the important people, far from her. This was good. This was safe. He could eat his dinner, do his job, and go back to his room without making a fool of himself. The banquet began. Speeches were made. Toasts were offered. The food was delicious, though Tae-hyun had trouble identifying what he was eating. Some kind of fruit that tasted like honey and fire. Some kind of meat that melted on his tongue like butter. He ate slowly, trying to enjoy the experience, trying not to look at the head table. Then came the ceremonial wine. Servants in white robes moved through the hall, carrying golden goblets filled with a dark red liquid. This was the wine of unity, a Valorian tradition. Both sides would drink together, symbolizing their friendship and trust. Ambassador Yoon received her goblet and held it high. The Valorian High Advisor did the same. At the head table, a servant approached Empress Litha with the finest goblet of all, decorated with jewels and ancient symbols. Tai-hyun watched as the servant placed the goblet before the Empress. Something felt wrong. He did not know why, but a cold feeling spread through his stomach. His military training had taught him to notice small details, things that other people missed, and right now something was wrong. He looked at the servant. The male was young, younger than the other servants. His hands were shaking slightly. His eyes kept moving to the door, like he was planning an escape. Taehyun looked at the goblet. The wine inside was the same dark red as all the others, but at the edge, where the liquid met the gold, there was a tiny line of discoloration, so small that nobody would see it unless they were looking, unless they knew what to look for. Poison. Taehyun stood up so fast that his chair fell backward with a crash. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. He did not care. He was already running, pushing past surprised Valorians, jumping over a low table, racing toward the head of the hall. Empress Litha had lifted the goblet to her lips. "No!" Taehyun shouted. He reached her just as she was about to drink. Without thinking, he slapped the goblet from her hand. It flew across the table, spilling its contents across the white crystal surface. The dark red wine hissed and bubbled where it touched the stone, eating through it like acid. Guards were on him in an instant. Strong hands grabbed his arms and forced him to his knees. Someone hit him across the face, and he tasted blood in his mouth. The room exploded with shouts and screams. "Assassin!" someone yelled. "Kill him! How dare he touch the Empress?" Taehyun did not struggle. He knelt on the floor with guards holding him down, blood dripping from his split lip, and waited to die. He had broken the most sacred law of Valoria. He had touched the Empress without permission. The punishment was death, immediate and without trial. But he had saved her. Whatever happened next, he had saved her. The room slowly went quiet. The guards pulled Taehyun's head up, forcing him to look at the throne. Empress Litha was standing. Her golden eyes were fixed on the ruined table. On the holes, the poisoned wine had burned through solid crystal. Her face showed no emotion, but her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. High Advisor Morath rushed forward. "My Empress, are you harmed?" "No." Her voice was calm, but there was something dangerous underneath it. "Thanks to this human." She turned to look at Taehyun. Her eyes met his, and once again he felt that strange connection, that impossible recognition. She walked toward him slowly, her dress flowing behind her like a shadow come to life. The guards pulled Taehyun lower, pressing his face toward the floor. But she raised one hand and they stopped. "Release him." "My Empress," Morath protested. "He touched you. The law demands—" "I know what the law demands." Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "But this human saw what my own guards did not. He saved my life at the risk of his own. The law also speaks of debt and honor, does it not?" Morath fell silent. The guards slowly released Taehyun's arms. Litha stood over him, tall and terrible and beautiful. She reached down and lifted his chin with one finger, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Why?" she asked softly, so quietly that only he could hear. "You are human. You live for a moment, and then you die. Why would you risk your brief life for mine?" Taehyun's throat was dry. His heart was pounding. Up close, she smelled like night-blooming flowers and distant stars. Her touch was cool against his skin. "I do not know," he answered honestly. "I saw the danger. I acted. There was no time to think." She studied him for a long moment. Her golden eyes seemed to look through his skin, into his soul, reading things he had never told anyone. Then slowly, she smiled. "Interesting," she said. She turned and walked back to her throne, leaving Taehyun kneeling on the cold crystal floor. The guards did not touch him. The room remained silent. He had saved the Empress of Valoria, and somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. The next morning, Taehyun woke to someone pounding on his door. He had not slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Empress's face, felt her finger lifting his chin, heard her voice saying that single word. "Interesting." He opened the door to find Suman standing in the corridor. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with something between fear and excitement. "You need to come with me," she said. "Now." "What is happening?" "The Empress has summoned you." Taehyun felt his stomach drop. "Summoned me? Why?" "I do not know. But when an alien Empress says she wants to see you, you do not ask questions. You just go." Suman grabbed his arm and pulled him into the corridor. "Ambassador Yoon is furious, by the way. She thinks you ruined everything last night. But she cannot do anything because the Empress specifically asked for you." They walked through the crystal corridors in silence. Taehyun tried to prepare himself for whatever was coming. Maybe the Empress had changed her mind. Maybe she had decided to punish him after all. Maybe this was the end. But when they reached the entrance to the royal chambers, Suman stopped. "This is as far as I can go," she said. "Only you are permitted inside." Taehyun looked at the massive doors of white and gold crystal. Two guards stood on either side, their golden eyes watching him without expression. "If I do not come back," he said to Suman, "tell my mother I love her." Suman punched him in the arm. "Do not be dramatic. Just go in there and be respectful. You saved her life. She probably just wants to thank you properly." Taehyun was not so sure, but he straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and walked toward the doors. The guard stepped aside, and the doors opened without a sound. The Empress's private chambers were not what he expected. He had imagined something cold and formal, like the Crystal Hall, but this room was warm and comfortable. Soft lights glowed from the walls. Plants with silver leaves grew in pots by the windows. Books and papers covered a large desk in the corner. It looked like a place where someone actually lived. Empress Litha stood by the window, looking out at the crystal towers of her city. She had changed from her formal dress into simpler robes of dark blue. Her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders. Without her crown and jewels, she looked younger, more real. She turned when she heard him enter. "Kang Tae-hyun," she said. Her voice was different too, softer and less formal. "Come in. Close the door behind you." He did as she asked, his heart beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Do you know why I called you here?" she asked. "No, Your Majesty. I have a question for you. The same question I asked last night, but this time I want a real answer." She walked toward him slowly, her bare feet silent on the crystal floor. "Why did you save me?" Taehyun struggled to find words. "I told you. I saw the danger, and I acted." "That is not an answer. That is a description." She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could see the tiny points of light in her golden eyes like stars in a midnight sky. "You are human. Your people have been part of the galactic community for less than 50 years. We Valorians have existed for 10,000 generations. To us, your entire civilization is a brief flicker, here and gone in a moment." She tilted her head, studying him like a scientist studying a strange new creature. "You had nothing to gain by saving me. If you had failed, you would have died. If you had succeeded but I had chosen to punish you anyway, you would have died. The logical choice was to do nothing, to let events happen and protect yourself." "That would have been cowardly," Taehyun said. "It would have been sensible. Where I come from, there is a difference between being sensible and being right." He met her eyes directly, surprised by his own courage. "You were in danger. I could help, so I helped. It was not complicated." Letha was silent for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and surprised, like she had not expected to find anything funny. The sound transformed her face, made her look less like an empress and more like an ordinary woman. "You humans," she said, shaking her head, "you are the strangest species in the galaxy." She walked to a small table and poured 2 glasses of something that looked like liquid silver. She handed one to Taehyun and kept the other for herself. "I must tell you something," she said. "Something that few off-worlders know about Valorians." She took a sip of her drink and continued. "We have abilities that other species do not. Our eyes can see heat patterns and electrical fields. Our ears can hear sounds that would be silent to you. And our minds can sense the thoughts of others when their emotions are strong enough." Taehyun felt cold. "You can read minds?" "Not exactly. We cannot hear your words or see your memories. But when you feel something strongly, when your emotions become powerful, we can sense the shape of them. Fear feels different from anger. Love feels different from hate. She set down her glass and looked at him directly. Last night, when you ran toward me, I felt your fear. But it was not fear for yourself. You were afraid for me, a stranger, an alien, someone who has done nothing for you and means nothing to you. Her golden eyes searched his face. That is what confused me. That is why I wanted to speak with you alone. Taehyun did not know what to say. He felt exposed, like she had opened a door inside him and looked at everything he had tried to hide. I do not understand it either, he admitted. When I saw you at the ceremony, I felt something I have never felt before. I thought it was just because you are beautiful, because you are powerful, because you are everything that humans dream of being. He paused, struggling to put his feelings into words. But when I saw the poison, when I realized you were in danger, something broke inside me. I did not think. I just knew that I could not let you be harmed. Litha was very still. Her golden eyes had not left his face. You are honest, she said finally. That is rare among diplomats. I am not really a diplomat. I am just a translator. You are more than that. She walked to her desk and picked up a small crystal badge. I am making you my personal human liaison. You will attend me at all public functions. You will advise me on human culture and customs. You will be my bridge between your world and mine. Taehyun stared at her. Your Majesty, I am not qualified for such a position. I decide who is qualified. She pressed the badge into his hand. It was warm from her touch. The court will not approve. They will say I am showing too much favor to a human. They will say it is dangerous, inappropriate, unwise. A small smile curved her lips. I do not care what they say. She walked back to the window and looked out at her city. I have ruled alone for 200 years, she said quietly. I have advisors who fear me, servants who worship me, and enemies who want to destroy me. But I do not have anyone who simply sees me as a person, who is not afraid to speak honestly to me, who cares about my safety not because I am their empress, but because I am myself. She turned back to him, and for a moment, Taehyun saw something vulnerable in her ancient eyes. Perhaps you can be that person, perhaps not, but I am curious enough to find out. Taehyun looked down at the badge in his hand. It was shaped like a crystal flame, the symbol of the Valorian royal house. Wearing this would put a target on his back. Every ambitious noble, every jealous advisor, every enemy of the Empress would see him as a threat or a weakness to exploit. But when he looked up at Litha, standing alone by the window with the pink sky behind her, he knew his answer. I accept, he said, and somewhere deep inside, he knew he had just changed his destiny forever. Weeks passed on Valoria Prime, and Taehyun's life transformed completely. He moved from the small guest room to larger chambers closer to the royal wing. He received new clothes made of Valorian fabric that changed color with his mood. He was given servants, guards, and an office filled with ancient texts about human Valorian relations. But most importantly, he spent time with Litha. Every morning he attended the royal council meetings. He stood behind the Empress's throne and watched as she dealt with the endless business of ruling an empire. Trade disputes, military reports, requests from distant colonies, complaints from noble families who felt they deserved more power or wealth or attention. Litha handled it all with patience and strength. She listened carefully to every speaker, asked sharp questions, and made decisions that were fair but firm. Taehyun admired her more with each passing day. At first, the Valorian court treated him with open hostility. They whispered behind his back, called him names in their own language, and looked at him with disgust in their golden eyes. He was human. He was inferior. He did not belong in their sacred halls, but Litha always defended him. He is my liaison, she would say calmly whenever someone complained. His presence is my will. Do you question my will? Nobody dared to question her will. Slowly, the hostility faded into cold tolerance. The Valorians still did not like him, but they learned to accept his presence. Some even began to show him small kindnesses. A nod of greeting here, a cup of tea there. But the best parts of Taehyun's new life were the private moments with Litha. In the evenings after the formal business was done, she would invite him to walk with her in the palace gardens. These gardens were unlike anything on Earth. Trees with leaves of living crystal grew beside pools of water that glowed with soft blue light. Flowers that sang opened their petals to the three moons. Paths of white stone wound through landscapes that seemed to come from dreams. During these walks, Litha was different. She set aside her crown in her formal manner. She asked questions about Earth, about human customs, about Taehyun's own life. "Tell me about your family," she said one evening. They were sitting on a bench beside a fountain that played music instead of water. "My mother raised me alone," Taehyun said. "My father died when I was young. She worked 3 jobs to pay for my education. She wanted me to have a better life than she did." "She sounds like a strong woman." "She is. The strongest person I know." Litha was quiet for a moment. "I never knew my mother. She died giving birth to me. It is rare among our people, but it happens. My father raised me until I came of age, and then he passed the crown to me and went into the long sleep." "The long sleep?" "When Valorians grow tired of living, they enter a state between life and death. Their bodies rest in crystal chambers beneath the palace. They dream forever, neither alive nor dead." She looked up at the three moons. "Sometimes I visit my father in his chamber. His face looks peaceful. I wonder what he dreams about." Taehyun felt a sudden urge to take her hand, to offer comfort, but he held back. She was still his empress. There were lines he should not cross. "Do you ever feel lonely?" he asked instead. She turned to look at him, surprise flickering in her golden eyes. "What a strange question." "Is it? You said yourself that you have no one who sees you as a person, that you have ruled alone for 200 years. That sounds lonely to me." For a long moment, Litha did not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Yes, I feel lonely. More than you can imagine. I am surrounded by millions of beings, yet none of them truly know me. They know the Empress. They know the symbol. They do not know Litha." She stood and walked to the edge of a glowing pool. Her reflection shimmered in the blue water. "When I was young, I thought love was something that happened in stories, a fantasy for those who had nothing better to do. As I grew older, I realized that it was real, but not for me. Empresses do not have the luxury of love. We have duty, responsibility, and the weight of worlds on our shoulders." Taehyun stood and walked to stand beside her. "On Earth we have a saying, love is not a luxury, it is a necessity." "How can that be? Your people lived for thousands of years without space travel, without advanced technology, without even knowing there were other beings in the universe. Love did not give you those things." "No, but love gave us the reason to want them." Taehyun looked at his own reflection in the pool. "Humans do not live long. Compared to Valorians, we are like candles that burn bright and then go out. We know our time is short, so we try to fill every moment with meaning, with connection, with love." He turned to face her directly. "Maybe that is why we love so fiercely, because we know it will not last, because every moment matters." Litha stared at him. In the blue light of the pool, her golden eyes seemed to glow even brighter. Her expression was unreadable, but something had changed in the air between them. Something had shifted. "You are very strange," she said finally. "You speak of things that should be simple as if they are profound. You speak of things that should be profound as if they are simple. Is that bad?" "No." A small smile touched her lips. "It is refreshing." They walked back to the palace in comfortable silence. At the door to her chambers, Litha paused. "Thank you, Taehyun." "For what?" "For being honest with me. For treating me like a person instead of a throne." She reached out and touched his cheek gently with her fingertips. Her touch was cool and soft, like moonlight made solid. "I am beginning to understand why you risked your life for me." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared through the door, leaving him standing alone in the corridor, with his heart racing and her touch burning on his skin. Over the following weeks, their bond grew stronger. Litha began to rely on him not just for advice about humans, but for support in her own decisions. She asked his opinion on trade agreements, on military strategies, on how to handle difficult nobles. Sometimes she took his advice, sometimes she did not, but she always listened. And Taehyun began to realize that his feelings had grown beyond simple attraction. He was falling in love with her. He knew it was hopeless. He knew it was forbidden. He knew that even if she felt something for him, their different lifespans made any future impossible. But he could not stop his heart from beating faster when she entered a room. He could not stop himself from smiling when she laughed at one of his jokes. He could not stop the warmth that spread through his chest when she looked at him with those golden eyes. Sumin noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You are making a mistake," she told him one night. "You are falling for her, and she is letting you." But what happens when you die of old age and she still looks exactly as she does now? What happens when she watches you wither and fade while she stays young forever? "I know," Taehyun said quietly, "but I cannot help how I feel." Sumin sighed. "I know you cannot. That is what scares me." But Taehyun was not scared. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do, even if it was impossible, even if it was hopeless, even if it broke his heart in the end. Some things were worth the pain. The news arrived on a cold morning when frost covered the crystal towers like a blanket of silver stars. A rival empire, the Krath Dominion, had declared its intention to expand into Valorian territory. They had assembled a fleet of warships at the border. Their demands were simple: surrender 3 colony worlds or face destruction. The Royal Council erupted into chaos. Some advisors wanted immediate war. Others wanted negotiation. Still others suggested paying the Krath to go away, sacrificing wealth instead of lives. Through it all, Litha sat on her throne in silence, listening to every argument, weighing every option. Her face was like carved stone, revealing nothing. Finally, High Advisor Marath stepped forward with a proposal that silenced the room. "My Empress, there is another way. The Krath Emperor has a son, Lord Kevros. He has expressed interest in a political marriage. If you were to take him as your consort, the Krath would become our allies instead of our enemies. The threat would disappear overnight." Taehyun felt his blood run cold. Litha did not move, did not react. "A political marriage? Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Kevros is young, powerful, and from an ancient bloodline. The union would strengthen both empires. It is the logical choice." "The logical choice," Litha repeated softly. She was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Invite Lord Kevros to Valoria Prime. I will meet him and consider the proposal." The council members bowed and began to leave. Taehyun stood frozen in his place, unable to move, unable to think. Political marriage, consort, another man standing beside her, touching her, claiming her as his own. He felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until it cracked. Litha's golden eyes found his across the room. For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression. Pain? Regret? He could not tell. Then she looked away and swept out of the council chamber, her guards following behind her. 2 weeks later, Lord Kevros arrived on Valoria Prime. He was everything Taehyun was not. Tall, even by Valorian standards, with skin like polished marble and eyes of burning red. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. His smile was charming but cold, like a knife wrapped in silk. The court loved him immediately. He was powerful, wealthy, and politically connected. The marriage would solve all their problems at once. They gathered around him like insects around a flame, laughing at his jokes and praising his wisdom. Taehyun watched from the shadows and felt hatred burning in his chest. It was not just jealousy, though jealousy was certainly part of it. There was something wrong about Kevros, something dark hiding behind those charming smiles and polite words. Taehyun could not explain it, but his instincts screamed that this man was dangerous. He tried to warn Litha during their evening walks, but she stopped inviting him to the gardens. She was too busy entertaining her guest, attending formal dinners and diplomatic functions, being photographed beside the handsome Krath Lord. Taehyun felt her slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The announcement came at a grand gala celebrating 1 month of negotiations. The Crystal Hall was filled with thousands of guests from across the galaxy. Music played, wine flowed, everyone wore their finest clothes and their brightest smiles. Taehyun stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing his liaison uniform and feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. Sumin found him there, hiding behind a pillar and watching the dance floor, where Litha and Kevros moved together in perfect harmony. "You look terrible," Sumin said. "Thank you for noticing. Come on, let us get some air. You do not need to torture yourself like this." But before they could move, High Advisor Marath stepped onto the raised platform and raised his hands for silence. "Friends, allies, honored guests," he announced, his voice carrying across the vast hall. "Tonight, we celebrate more than friendship between our peoples. Tonight, we celebrate the beginning of a new era." He gestured toward the dance floor, where Litha and Kevros had stopped. "I am honored to announce that Empress Litha has agreed to consider Lord Kevros of the Krath Dominion as her potential consort. A formal engagement period will begin immediately, with a final decision to be made at the next lunar cycle." The crowd erupted in applause. Kevros smiled his cold smile and bowed gracefully. Litha stood beside him, beautiful and distant, her face showing nothing. Tai Hyun felt his heart shatter. Sumin grabbed his arm. "We need to go. Now, before you do something stupid." But Tai Hyun could not move. He could not look away from Litha, standing beside another man, preparing to give herself to someone else for the sake of politics and power. She looked magnificent in her gown of midnight blue. Her silver hair was arranged like a crown of stars. Her golden eyes swept across the room, accepting the applause and congratulations of her people. And then her eyes found his. Across the crowded hall, through the chaos of celebrating nobles and cheering servants, their gazes locked. Taehyun saw something in her expression that he had never seen before. A question, a plea, a desperate longing that matched his own. His heart, which he thought was already broken, broke again. "I wish she was mine," he whispered. The words were barely audible, lost in the noise of the celebration. He did not mean to say them out loud. They slipped out like a breath, like a prayer, like the last words of a dying man. But Litha heard them. Her Valorian senses, those impossible abilities that let her feel the emotions of others, caught his whisper from across the room. She heard not just the words, but the feeling behind them, the love, the longing, the despair. Her expression changed. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. And slowly, deliberately, she smiled. It was not her empress smile, cold and political. It was not her polite smile, distant and formal. It was something else entirely, something warm and surprised and dangerous. She grinned at him like a predator who had finally spotted her prey. Taehyun's legs nearly gave out beneath him. Kevros noticed her distraction. He followed her gaze across the room and found Taehyun standing in the shadows. His red eyes narrowed with suspicion and anger. "My lady?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Is something wrong?" Litha did not answer him. She was still looking at Taehyun, still wearing that strange, wonderful, terrifying grin. "Nothing is wrong," she said finally. "In fact, I believe something is finally right." She turned away from Kevros and walked toward the raised platform, her gown flowing behind her like a river of darkness. "My people," she said, her voice cutting through the celebration like a blade. "Before we continue, I must inform you of something important." The hall fell silent. Everyone watched the Empress with confusion and concern. "The ancient laws of Valoria grant any sentient being the right to challenge for my hand. This right of declaration has not been invoked for 1,000 years. But the law still stands." Morath stepped forward, his face pale. "My Empress, what are you saying?" Litha's golden eyes found Taehyun one more time. "I am saying that Lord Kevros is not the only candidate for my affection." Her smile grew wider, more dangerous. "And I am curious to see if anyone else is brave enough to challenge for what they want." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Kevros's handsome face twisted with anger. "You cannot be serious." "No one would dare." "I would." The voice was Taehyun's. He did not remember deciding to speak. He did not remember stepping forward out of the shadows. But suddenly he was standing in the middle of the hall, with thousands of eyes staring at him in disbelief. Sumin grabbed his arm. "Taehyun, no, you will die." He gently removed her hand. "Maybe, but some things are worth dying for." He walked toward the platform, toward the Empress, toward whatever future awaited him. Kevros laughed, but there was no humor in it. A human? A brief, fragile, insignificant human dares to challenge me? Yes, Taehyun said simply. I do. Litha's grin had not faded. If anything, it had grown even brighter. Then so be it, she declared. Let the trial of worthiness begin. The trial of worthiness was held in the arena of ancestors, an ancient colosseum carved from a single piece of black crystal. 50,000 Valorians filled the seats, their golden eyes fixed on the arena floor, where two very different beings stood facing each other. On one side, Lord Kevros of the Krath Dominion. He wore armor of red and silver that gleamed like fire. His red eyes burned with confidence and contempt. Behind him stood his supporters, dozens of Krath nobles who had traveled from their empire to witness his inevitable victory. On the other side, Kang Tae-hyun. He wore simple clothes of black and silver, the colors of his diplomatic uniform. He had no armor, no weapons, and no supporters except Su-min, who sat in the stands with tears in her eyes. High Advisor Marath stood between them, his voice amplified by ancient crystal technology. The trial of worthiness consists of 3 tests, he announced. Combat to prove physical strength, wisdom to prove mental ability, and will to prove the truth of the heart. The winner shall be granted the right to court Empress Litha. The loser shall accept defeat with honor and leave Valoria Prime forever. He turned to face the royal box, where Litha sat on a throne of white crystal. She wore a crown of silver flames and a gown of liquid gold. Her face was calm, but Tae-hyun could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. Does the Empress approve these terms? I approve, Litha said. Her voice carried across the arena like a bell. Marath nodded. Then let the first test begin, combat. Servants brought weapons to both challengers. Kevros chose a massive sword that crackled with red energy. Taehyun looked at the selection for a long moment, then chose a simple staff of black wood. The crowd laughed. The human has chosen his own funeral, someone shouted. Kevros smiled his cold smile. I will try to make this quick, little creature. Consider it mercy. The signal sounded and Kevros attacked. He was faster than anything Taehyun had ever seen. The energy sword cut through the air in a blur of red light. Taehyun barely managed to dodge the first strike, rolling across the arena floor as the blade sliced through the space where his head had been. Kevros pressed his advantage, attacking with the skill of someone who had trained for centuries. His blades sang through the air, each strike powerful enough to cut a human in half. Taehyun could not match him in strength or speed. But he had something Kevros did not: experience fighting opponents who were bigger and stronger than himself. During his military service on Earth, Taehyun had trained in the old combat arts. Not the flashy fighting of entertainment videos, but the practical techniques of survival. How to use your opponent's strength against them. How to find weakness in apparent power. How to wait for the right moment. He waited now, dodging and blocking and retreating, letting Kevros expend his energy in increasingly frustrated attacks. The crowd booed. They wanted blood, violence, a decisive victory for their favored champion. But Taehyun did not fight for the crowd. Kevros swung his sword in a wide arc meant to cut Taehyun in half. In that moment of overextension, Taehyun saw his opening. He stepped inside the swing, thrust his staff up into Kevros's chin, and swept his legs out from under him in a single fluid motion. The Krath Lord crashed to the ground. Before he could rise, Taehyun's staff was at his throat. The arena fell silent. Morath stared in disbelief. The first test goes to Kang Tae-hyun. The crowd erupted, not with cheers but with shocked whispers. A human had defeated a Krath warrior in single combat. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. But it had happened. Kevros rose slowly, his red eyes burning with hatred. You will not be so lucky in the next test, insect. The second test was wisdom. Both challengers were brought to a chamber filled with ancient puzzles and riddles, problems that had challenged Valorian scholars for millennia. Kevros attacked the puzzles with brute intellect, applying the knowledge he had accumulated over his 300 years of life. He solved mechanical puzzles with practiced ease. He decoded ancient languages with the speed of a computer. But the final puzzle was different. It was not about knowledge or calculation. It was a simple question carved into a stone tablet. A king has 2 sons. One is strong and brave. destined for glory. The other is weak and kind, destined for nothing. A enemy threatens the kingdom. The king can save only one son. Which should he choose? Kevros answered immediately. The strong son. He is worth more to the kingdom. The tablet remained dark. Wrong answer. Tai-hyun studied the question for a long time. The crowd grew restless. Kevros smiled triumphantly. Finally, Tai-hyun spoke. Neither. Morath frowned. Please explain your answer. A true king would not choose between his children. He would find another way. He would sacrifice himself if necessary. The question is not about which son has more value. It is about what kind of king you want to be. The tablet glowed with brilliant white light. Correct answer. The second test went to Tai-hyun. Kevros was trembling with rage. This is a trick. The human is cheating somehow. There is no cheating, Morath said firmly. The trials are ancient and absolute. The third test was will. Both challengers were led to a chamber deep beneath the arena, where a pillar of fire burned in eternal darkness. This was the flame of truth, a sacred artifact that revealed the deepest intentions of any being who walked through it. Morath explained the rules. Each challenger will walk through the flame of truth. The fire will burn away all deception and reveal the heart beneath. If your intentions are selfish or false, the flame will burn red. If your intentions are pure and true, the flame will burn gold. Kevros went first. He walked into the fire with confidence, letting the flames wash over his body. The fire turned pale orange and then settled into a dull red. Images formed in the flames. Kevros sitting on a throne commanding armies, crushing enemies beneath his feet. His intention is power, Morath announced. He seeks the Empress not for love, but for what she can give him. Kevros emerged from the fire, his face twisted with anger. Power is not selfish. Power is how things get done. The Empress needs a strong consort, not a lovesick fool. Then it was Tai-hyun's turn. He walked toward the fire, feeling its heat even before he entered. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to stop, to turn back, to run. Fire was death to humans. Fire was pain. But he thought of Litha, sitting in her throne above. He thought of her smile in the gardens, her laugh when he said something unexpected, the loneliness in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. He stepped into the flame. Pain exploded through his body. It was worse than anything he had ever experienced. Worse than his military training, worse than his worst nightmares. The fire burned through his skin, his muscles, his bones. It burned through his thoughts, his memories, his deepest secrets. He screamed. The fire showed images of his life, his mother working 3 jobs, his lonely childhood, his years of struggle and failure. And then it showed Litha, not as an empress, but as a woman, lonely, burdened, afraid to hope for something better. It showed his love for her, pure and complete, not love for her power or her beauty, but love for who she truly was beneath the crown. The flames shifted. They turned from red to orange, from orange to white, and finally from white to brilliant, blazing gold. The same gold as Litha's eyes. Taehyun collapsed out of the fire, his body still trembling with pain. The crowd gasped. Even Morath looked shaken. His intention is love, the advisor announced, his voice thick with emotion. Pure, selfless, true. The flame has never burned so brightly. Kevros stared at the golden light in disbelief. This is impossible. He is human. Humans cannot love like this. Apparently, said a voice from above, we were wrong about humans. Everyone looked up. Empress Litha was descending from her throne, walking down the steps toward the arena floor. Her golden gown flowed behind her like liquid sunlight. Her eyes were fixed on Tai-hyun with an expression that made his heart stop. She crossed the arena floor and knelt beside him. Gently, she took his burned hands in her own. You fool, she whispered. You beautiful, impossible fool. Did I win? Tai-hyun asked, his voice weak. Litha laughed, and there were tears in her golden eyes. Yes, she said. You won. Above them, the flame of truth continued to burn gold, brighter than it had ever burned in 10,000 years of Valorian history. The days following the trial were chaos. Lord Kevers and his delegation left Valoria Prime in fury, threatening war and revenge. The royal court split into factions, some supporting the Empress's choice and others calling for Taehyun's removal by any means necessary. Messages flooded in from across the galaxy, demanding explanations, offering congratulations, expressing horror. Letha handled it all with the same calm strength she had shown since Taehyun first saw her. She met with advisors, negotiated with angry nobles, and sent diplomatic messages to worried allies. Through it all, she kept Taehyun close to her side. "Are you sure about this?" he asked her one night. They were standing on the balcony of her private chambers, looking out at the crystal city below. "You could still change your mind, say the trial was invalid, find some excuse to send me away?" "I could," Litha agreed. She turned to face him, her golden eyes soft in the moonlight. "But I will not. The galaxy will think you have lost your mind. Your own people will question your judgment. The Krath might actually start a war over this. Let them." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw. "I have spent 200 years doing what others expected of me, making the logical choice, the sensible choice, the choice that kept everyone happy except myself." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the coolness of her body against his warmth. "For once in my eternal life, I want to choose something for myself. I want to choose love over duty, happiness over stability, you over everyone else." Taehyun's heart was beating so hard he was sure she could feel it. "And if I die before you, if you have to watch me grow old while you stay young forever, then I will cherish every moment we have together. And when you are gone, I will remember you for the rest of my existence." She smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Humans taught me something, Taehyun. You taught me something. Life is not measured by its length. It is measured by its depth." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was cool and warm at the same time, foreign and familiar, terrifying and wonderful. It lasted only a moment, but that moment contained everything. All the longing and fear and hope and love that had been building between them since the first day they met. When they separated, Litha was smiling. "I have made my choice," she said. "Now make yours. Do you want to spend your brief human life beside me, facing whatever challenges the universe throws at us? Or do you want to return to Earth and live a safe, ordinary existence?" Taehyun laughed. "You know that is not really a choice." "Then say it. I want to hear the words." He took her hands in his and looked directly into her golden eyes. "I choose you, Litha. I choose us. I choose love, even knowing it will end. I choose happiness, even knowing it will bring pain. I choose to spend whatever time I have left making you smile, because that smile is worth more than all the safe, ordinary lives in the galaxy." Letha's eyes were bright with tears that would not fall. "You humans," she whispered, "you are the most impossible species in existence. And you love us for it." "Yes," she admitted, "I do." The wedding took place 3 months later, in the same crystal hall where Taehyun had first seen Litha sitting on her throne. But now the hall was transformed with flowers from 100 worlds, lights that danced like living stars, and music that seemed to come from the universe itself. Guests filled every seat. Ambassadors from Earth sat beside Valorian nobles. Representatives from allied empires mingled with curious observers from distant galaxies. Even some of Taehyun's family had made the journey, including his mother, who cried through the entire ceremony and kept telling everyone who would listen about her son's accomplishments. Suman was there too, standing as Taehyun's witness. She had complained about his choice constantly for the past 3 months, but now her eyes were red and she kept blowing her nose. "I still think you are crazy," she whispered as he walked past her toward the altar. "Probably," he agreed, "but crazy in a good way." The ceremony was a blend of Valorian and human traditions. Taehyun spoke vows in both languages, promising to honor and protect Litha for all the days of his life. Litha spoke vows in return, promising to cherish and remember him for all the centuries that would follow. When they were pronounced partners under the law of both their peoples, the crowd erupted in cheers. Taehyun lifted Litha's veil and kissed her in front of the entire galaxy. Somewhere, he knew, Lord Kavros was plotting revenge. Somewhere, enemies were making plans to tear them apart. Somewhere, politicians were calculating how to exploit their union for their own benefit. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the woman in his arms and the life they would build together. The years that followed were everything Tae-hyun had hoped for and nothing he had expected. Being the consort of an alien empress was challenging in ways he could never have imagined. There were assassination attempts and political crises. There were cultural misunderstandings and diplomatic disasters. There were nights when Litha was so burdened by the weight of her responsibilities that she could barely speak. But there were also quiet evenings in the Crystal Gardens, watching the three moons rise. There were mornings waking up beside her, feeling her cool body pressed against his warm one. There were moments of laughter and joy and connection that made all the difficulties worthwhile. And there was their daughter. She was born 5 years after the wedding, the first human-Valorian hybrid in history. They named her Yuna, which meant to shine in Korean. She had her mother's golden eyes and her father's dark hair. She had Valorian grace and human warmth. She was beautiful and impossible and perfect. Scientists studied her with fascination. Politicians debated what her existence meant for human-Valorian relations. Philosophers argued about whether she was evidence of something wonderful or something dangerous. But to Tae-hyun and Litha, she was simply their daughter, their miracle, their proof that love could bridge any gap, overcome any difference, create something entirely new. 20 years after the wedding, Tae-hyun stood on the balcony of the palace, watching his daughter prepare for her first speech to the Galactic Council. She was nervous, he could tell, but she was also strong. She had inherited her mother's poise and her father's determination. Litha joined him, slipping her hand into his. Her skin was still smooth and young. His had begun to wrinkle and spot with age. But when she looked at him, her golden eyes held the same love they had always held. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of what?" "Of leaving me. Of what will happen when you are gone." Tae-hyun squeezed her hand. "I used to be, but not anymore." "Why not?" He pointed to their daughter, standing tall and confident before the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. "Because part of me will live on in her, in everything we built together, in the changes we made to the galaxy just by being together." He turned to face his wife, his partner, his love. "Humans die, Litha. It is what we do. But the things we create, the love we share, the people we touch, those things are immortal. They go on forever, even after we are gone." Litha leaned her head against his shoulder. "You humans and your philosophy. You love it. I do." Below them, their daughter stepped up to the podium. The council fell silent. Cameras from every corner of the galaxy focused on this unprecedented moment. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," Yuna said, her voice strong and clear. "I stand before you as something that should not exist, a bridge between two peoples who were never meant to meet, a child of two worlds, two cultures, two ways of being." She paused, and in that pause, Tae-hyun saw both himself and Litha reflected in her bearing. "Some of you fear what I represent. Change is always frightening. But I ask you to consider what my existence means. It means that love is stronger than distance, stronger than difference, stronger than fear. It means that when beings choose hope over hatred, miracles become possible." She looked up at the balcony where her parents stood watching. "My father is human. He will live a short life and then be gone. But he taught me something that I will carry for as long as I exist, whether that is 100 years or 1,000. She smiled, and it was the same smile that had made Tae-hyun fall in love with her mother all those years ago. "He taught me that we love fiercely because we know nothing lasts forever, and that makes us brave enough to try anyway." The council chamber erupted in applause. Tae-hyun felt tears running down his aged cheeks. Litha held him tighter. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to try." And in that moment, surrounded by the proof of their love and the promise of their legacy, Tae-hyun knew that his brief human life had been worth more than he ever could have imagined. Because some things were more powerful than death. Some things lasted forever, and love was the most powerful thing of all.